Hello everybody, welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at what the phrase, all Israel will be saved means from Romans chapter 11 verses 25 to 26. Paul says this in Romans 11:26, and in this way, all Israel will be saved. What does not seem so clear is what those words mean. Supersessionists, referring to Christians who believe that the church has replaced Israel as the people of God, claim that Romans 11:26 is consistent with their view. When Paul says that all Israel will be saved, they believe that Israel refers to the church. Non-supersessionists, referring to Christians who do not believe the church has replaced Israel, argues that Romans 11:26 supports that God has not rejected Israel and has a plan to save them as a nation. So which view is correct? Let's jump in to find out. If you look at the context of Romans chapter 9 to 11, Paul comments on the theme of a remnant within national Israel. For example, he writes this, and Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will be saved. Paul develops this concept of a remnant within Israel by citing Isaiah 10:22 and Isaiah 28:16 to highlight a distinction between those who believe and those who will be put to shame. Paul highlights the believing remnant within Israel's history as a guarantee or confirmation that he will eventually save the nation as a whole. This reading of the remnant is further supported by the picture of the first fruits and the olive tree illustration in Romans chapter 11 verses 13 through 24. In Romans chapter 11 verse 16, Paul mentions that the believing remnant of Israel functions as the first fruits of a dough and previews what God will do for the whole batch, namely the nation of Israel. We see that the remnant anticipates the salvation of the nation when Paul connects the first fruit of a dough picture with the root of an olive tree. In Paul's olive tree illustration, the natural branches refer to national Israel, while the wild branches refer to Gentiles. Paul states that if God has the power to graft in wild branches to the olive tree, then he has the power to graft in the natural branches again if they do not continue in unbelief. Paul argues that God has the ability and willingness to save national Israel if they are willing to repent, and that the remnant functions as a preview of what God will do for the entire nation. So the illustration of branches from Romans chapter 11 verses 16 through 24 explains how God has not rejected Israel. Paul has already said in Romans chapter 9 verse 30 to 10 verse 21 that the Jews are not saved because they did not have faith in Christ. Therefore, when Paul writes that God has the power to graft them in again, he is emphasizing that God is willing and able to redeem national Israel. So with this context in mind, let's look at what Paul means when he says that all Israel will be saved. There are three things that will help us properly understand this verse. First, the word mystery in Romans 11 verse 25 needs to be defined. Romans 11:25 connects back with Romans 11:24. Paul has previously argued that God is including Gentiles as his people because of Israel's rejection through the olive tree illustration. Then he says that this reality is a mystery. In Jewish language, mystery does not refer to a hidden secret, but to God's hidden will that is now revealed. Now, the Old Testament has already predicted that Gentiles will be a part of God's covenant community. But the mystery that Paul is referring to is that the way God will save Gentiles is through the judgment of Israel until all the Gentiles are saved. Second, the phrase "in this way" from Romans 11:26 needs to be understood correctly. There are three different views for interpreting this verse. The first interpretation is that this phrase refers to the way God will save Israel. So God is going to save Israel by saving individual Jews and Gentiles. Therefore, through the salvation of individual Jews and Gentiles, Israel is saved. So according to this interpretation, Israel is synonymous with the church. The second interpretation argues that "in this way" refers to how the Gentile salvation will be the way Israel will eventually be saved. Since Israel's hardening allows Gentiles to be saved, the salvation of Gentiles will provoke Israel with jealousy, causing them to turn to Christ. This interpretation is supported by Paul's statement from Romans 11:11, where Paul says that the Gentiles are saved to make Israel jealous. The third interpretation argues that "in this way" means "just as." This interpretation connects Israel's salvation to the Old Testament prophecy from Isaiah 59 verses 20 to 21, which Paul cites in this same verse. So, the verse should be read this way: all Israel will be saved, just as it is written. It seems strange for Paul to quote Isaiah 59 verses 20 to 21, a prophecy regarding Israel, to say that the church has become Israel. Instead, it seems more likely that either Paul is saying that through the church, Israel will be provoked to jealousy and be saved, or that Israel will be saved just as Isaiah predicted. Either the second or third interpretation provides a plausible explanation that does not require Israel to be read as a church in Romans 11 verse 26. The final issue that needs to be resolved is who all Israel is referring to. There are four options. First, Israel can refer to the church. Second, Israel refers to the believing remnant within national Israel in history. Third, Israel refers to believing Jews in the church. Or fourth, Israel refers to national Israel. The first view is the weakest of the four, in my opinion. Although Paul previously stated that Gentile believers are the true circumcision and the sons and daughters of Abraham, the context determines the meaning for all Israel in Romans 11:26. Israel, up to this point in the book of Romans, has always referred to ethnic Israel. The quotation of Isaiah 59 verses 20 to 21 and Jeremiah 31:34 seems to indicate that ethnic Israel is clearly what is meant with the phrase all Israel, since both passages are prophecies concerning national Israel. The second view seems unlikely. If Israel is referring to all the believing remnant within Israel throughout history, then how is that a mystery? Old Testament narratives already reveal that God has saved the remnant within Israel. Also, if all Israel referred to the sum of all the believing remnants within Israel's history, then that total is still the remnant within Israel. For example, let's say 100 people represented all of Israel at one time. So let's imagine if only 20% of national Israel were truly believers at any moment. During the time of Moses, there were 20 believers, for example. Or during the time of Joshua, there were 20 believers. Let's say you add up all the true believers within Israel throughout its history. The total will still only equate to 20% of Israel. Thus, to say all Israel refers to the total sum of the believing remnant within Israel does not make sense, since it only refers to 20% of the nation as being saved and not all of the nation. The third view is stronger since it describes a future conversion for individual Jews. According to this view, Israel is integrated in the church in such a way that Israel's national role in God's kingdom no longer exists. However, this view does not correctly categorize Israel and the church. Let me explain. Israel refers to a nation, while the church refers to the individuals from a multitude of nations who are united by the Holy Spirit. So the church is not a nation, but the umbrella that includes people from all nations in God's kingdom. So kingdom citizen is part of a particular nation and the church at the same time. For example, an Egyptian retains his national identity in God's kingdom while also being part of the church. A Brazilian retains his national identity in God's kingdom while also being part of the church. However, a Brazilian believer does not redefine Egypt in the kingdom since he is not part of that national entity. So to argue that Israel is part of the church in such a way that their national status does not continue in the kingdom is not correct. Why? Because Israel is one nation that is part of the church, but is not synonymous with the church. Believing Jews are part of the church, but will continue to be a part of Israel, just like believing South Koreans are part of the church, but will also be a part of South Korea in the kingdom. So Gentiles being part of the church has no bearing on Israel as a nation because Gentiles do not identify with Israel as a national identity, but with their respective nationalities. The fourth view that sees all Israel as national Israel seems to fit the context of Romans chapter 9 through 11. Paul is speaking about the restoration of the Jews in the sense in which they have been rejected, which is as a nation. Paul also connects Israel's salvation with the new covenant promises of restoration, which is an expansion of the promises made to Abraham and David. All these promises for Israel, according to Paul, are irrevocable. And one of God's irrevocable promises is land, which is the primary trait of any nation. So if Israel will possess their land in God's kingdom, then they will also exist as a nation in God's kingdom. And if Israel will exist as a nation in God's kingdom, then that means at some point they will no longer be in judgment, but will be saved, just as Paul writes. Thank you to today's sponsor, Awe and Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the relationship between Israel and the church, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you!